morning and welcome to the Point. Now that the Michigan State Legislature is back in session, the first big order of business is the $54 billion budget. The appropriations chairman over in the House of Representatives is optimistic it can be done in somewhat over a month, but she admits that it's still in the early stages. We talked with Appropriations Chairman Representative Laura Cox.
This is the first step in the process. The subcommittees in the House and the Senate have all kind of kicked their budget proposals out of committee. So now it's going to go to the full Appropriations Committee for it to be voted on and amended and discussed and reviewed and a lot of oversight. And then from there, then we kind of meet with our Senate counterparts and with the governor and kind of hammer out what the priorities are, kind of have an agreement, and then we go to conference. So it's just the very first step of a very condensed, intense process that we have every intention of finishing up in early June.
And you said it, condensed, intense. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about some numbers in a minute, but the process that you speak of is much different than it was 10 years ago. And there are a lot of reasons for that. 10 years ago, the state's finances were in comparatively disastrous shape as to where they are now. You weren't a legislator there, but you certainly remember that time all too well. So that certainly plays in favor of people like you who are in charge of putting the budget together. But the other difference is that under the leadership of this governor, who is, as he points out, a CPA and likes to point out that he's a nerd, he wanted this budget done early. And I remember the first year, Senator Richardville, when I asked him, I said, can you really get a budget by June? He goes, that's a suggestion. But the fact is, for 6 years in a row, it's been done by late May, early June, which is a big sea change. Does that put more pressure on you?
Well, it's a lot of pressure, and it's a lot of new members. There's a lot of member education, the appropriations members, as well as just new members. And like you said, term limits, there's always a large turnover, and we're lucky to have a lot of new members. And so actually I just left an hour-long education for just people that are assigned to policy committees to kind of educate them on how the budget process works, give them kind of an overview of the current budget, and kind of get them just to hear the terms and kind of get more familiar with it and answer any questions that they might have and kind of point them in the right direction if they have real specific concerns. So I don't think it's too quick. I mean, when you were talking about the budget issues, I was a Wayne County Commissioner, and I was up to my eyeballs in the appropriations process for Wayne County, which is the largest county in the state, and it was about a $2.6 billion budget at the time. We're talking about a $54 billion budget. So it's in multiplying, it's the numbers bigger, but the breakdown and the ability to look at the different areas and the different kinds of budgets, that's still the same process. It's just the bigger number.
What are we appropriating for? Early in this legislative session, the leadership had designs on lowering revenues by lowering income taxes. That bill failed, but do you appropriate for the numbers that were laid out from the revenue estimating conferences? Do you assume future tax cuts? How do you do that?
Well, I mean, if Laura had her way, we would obviously give the taxpayers income tax relief, and I believe that leadership in the House really wants to give income tax relief, as well as, I shouldn't say income tax relief, tax relief. Let me just use that term as well. And I do believe there's some sort of appetite with the Senate as well as the governor, and those conversations are going on, but right now we're just focusing on being really good stewards of the taxpayers' money. So we have a $54 billion budget. We want to make sure that we're putting our money where it counts, what's going to give the biggest bang for the buck, what is necessary, what we have to fund. You know, we want to make sure we're increasing like public safety. So the House is proposing a trooper school, but that's about $6.5 million. But that's something that's really important to us, to make sure that we have public safety is one of the things we want to do. We're increasing funding in schools. Obviously, that's a really important thing that, you know, the taxpayers in the state want to make sure that we have good schools and they're funded well. So we're increasing funding for schools as well. So there's a lot of different issues that we in the House are proposing as priorities for ourselves and our spending.
One of the things that I think people are surprised by, and you'll correct me if I have these numbers wrong, but if you take health, human services, the safety net, those things that we think about, a lot of that federal money, plus education, the money that comes in mostly from the state, a little bit of federal money. That's about 3/4 of that $54 billion budget.
It's a good part, and I don't want to,
Yeah.
don't correct,
Yeah.
we can't, I don't
Yeah,
have it right in front of me,
right.
but it's about 3/4
Yeah.
of that, yes, absolutely.
So when you get down to it, everything else that we think of as government, corrections, public safety, everything that happens on this campus, all of the functions for all of the state departments, for Michigan Department of Transportation and the Attorney General's office and the Secretary of State's office, all that comes out of that other little part. So that's why making those spending decisions is so tough, because each of these has to be funded. You just can't say this year to Director Steidel, we're not going to fund the Michigan Department of Transportation.
Unfortunately, no, we can't do that, nor do we want to do
Right.
that. The people of the state want good, good infrastructure, good roads. So, we have to have prisons. Unfortunately, we have to fund them, and so our job is to make sure that if we're funding the prisons, we're funding them efficiently, and it's safe. It's safe for the workers in the prisons as well as for the people that are in the prison. We want to make sure that if we're doing actual programming for prisoners as they leave prison, for halfway houses or programs to help get them into society again, that there is a benefit for that. It's a good program, and we're seeing positive results. So those are the kinds of things that they go through when they're going through the deliberative process in the budget.
And toward that end, there have already been some criminal justice reforms that have been passed. I know there are others that are being considered. So while those would seem to be something that are about policy, and they are, but they're also a policy with an eye on how it impacts the spending for the state. Because if you can make it more efficient, if you can help people, if you can keep recidivism down, for example, that can impact the budget process, right?
Right. Well, it's just like everybody has to do at home. You look at your budget and you say, can we afford the new car, or should I buy a car that's 2 years old? Would that be a better fit for our budget? Everybody has to do that. Should I have cable? Should I not have cable? Should I have, should the kids have, new bikes, or should they hand them down? Those are the kinds of decisions we expect, everybody in the state of Michigan has to do that for their own budget, and we as legislators, at least in the House, we make sure that, we want to make sure that we're good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, that we're not overspending, and that we're making sure that we're not doing duplicative services or services that aren't giving us results.
One of the things that you mentioned within that discretionary money, the general fund, general purpose, is that some of those promises have already been made. In a couple of years, there's going to be another $600 million drawdown for roads to come up to that $1.2 billion that the legislature fought really hard to figure out a way to get to the money that the governor had asked for, that we see demonstrated with crumbling roads and bridges and that type of thing is needed. Is that something that as you're doing this budget, you have an eye on looking down the road? Because that comes up in the 2 budgets out?
Yeah, well, not next year, not the one that we're proposing, but the next one.
Right.
And it's about $150 million general fund, then it goes to $300 million, then it goes to the full $600 million. So it'll be 1.2 together. So already we have activated the gas tax, which a lot of people are not happy about, and I understand their frustration. But part of it is it's like there was a lot of angst on how do you fund it? Is it all new funding, or is it existing as well? So I think they split the baby, 600 new funding, 600 existing funding, meaning from the general fund. So that was the agreement that was made, that was the legislation that was passed, and then so any good appropriator looks outward, and we may look sometimes up to 5 years ahead. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at, as well as anybody that's maybe has a kid in high school is like, okay, I have to plan for college tuition if their kid decides to go to college, or they decide to help their kid go to college. So we do all the things that everybody else has to do back at their table, the kitchen table, when they're trying to figure out their own personal budgets. We do those kinds of things as well. If you're going to have a baby, if you decide if you can afford to have another baby, I mean, some people don't have that ability to decide, but you know what I mean? It's like you have to decide with the facts that you are dealing with at this time, but you also try to look outward.
This is my final question. This office, the one for your counterpart across the hall, I have always considered, obviously you have a lot of access and you get to oversee this budget process, which is really pretty interesting, but it also is a lot of pressure. And I'm always interested in what draws people to this? Because this is a coveted seat. People want to be the chair of appropriations. Do you ever, sometime as you're driving home, do you scratch your head and say, why did I want to do that?
No, never. I don't know what it is. I kind of got the bug when I was again in Wayne County Commissioner, and I was the chair of appropriations for 2 terms, which is 4 years, and I was the vice chair for 1 term, which was made 6 years that I was very much heavily involved in negotiating the budget and appointed by Democratic chairs. I just have a real true desire to look at the numbers and negotiate and make deals. And when I say make deals, I mean that, we're going to get everybody at the table and try to hash out a way to make everybody happy and a little unhappy, but have a good result. And so I really like it. I enjoy it a lot. I think I'm very honored to be able to do it. To be the first woman is pretty cool, but I didn't even know that I would be. It's just more like it's a really, really cool job. It is very stressful, and people might say I'm kind of like a little bit of, pushy, or there's other words that they probably use, but I really enjoy it, and I have to kind of keep people in line. I got to keep people in time, and I got to be really firm with deadlines and numbers, and if I do this, you got to follow me. I need support. So it's a great team effort, and I'm just kind of the captain of the team right now in this instance, and I love it.
We'll continue to watch the budget process, and when we come back, a major piece of legislation passed late last year, and you may not have heard about it. It's next, To the Point. Welcome back to The Point. Last December, when the headlines were dominated about Donald Trump being the new president of the United States and everything that was going on in Washington, something important happened in Lansing. It affects every person, every business, every entity. A new energy policy was passed, and this past week we sat down and talked with Senator Mike Nofts about the process and the product. Senator, in the midst of an amazingly complex election, when everybody was still trying to figure out what was happening, was going to happen in Washington,
right,
you and your colleagues ended up passing one of the most intricate pieces of legislation that has ever been dealt with around here. And this isn't the first time you've done it. It's energy regulation.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about the process and how you finally came to what you were just describing to me was a supermajority vote.
Yeah, Rick, it's very, very interesting. I love it when I have these challenges in front of me. I came up here to Lansing to make a difference. And not only make a difference for myself, but also then try to find the answer and then convince fellow representatives and senators who would have to vote on this issue if it came up, what was the best way to go and the best thing for Michigan residents and for Michigan businesses. And it was a tough bill. It's worth billions of dollars to individual companies and manufacturers and people that pay for energy. It costs a lot of money. We all need it. We can't live without it. Just to have a storm go through and you're without it for a day or two. You know the stories. You do your stories. I mean, it's the headline story a lot of times. Is just devastating to people who don't have that electricity. And so it's a huge issue. And so everybody truly cares about that issue. And so you have a lot of different opinions because everybody has one, because everybody wants energy and uses it. So it is a tough case, and I think the best way to go about it, I learned a lot when I was in the House and we did the first bill. That was over 8 years ago, and that was in 2008, and that's when we were in the minority, but I had a great speaker who was Andy Dillon at the time, and he let me work with his majority. I used to be the majority chairman of the committee, and the next day I was the minority vice chair. That's a game changer, and that wakes you up. But he still saw the benefit I had in my way of doing things, and I was so grateful for him for doing that. But what you end up doing is process is so important. Number one, it has to be open, and we started this time over 3 years ago before we actually got this bill done last December.
Let me stop you right there so people understand. 3 years ago, people often say, well, what are they doing in Lansing? Well, for 3 years you had hearings, brought in stakeholders, because again, it's difficult to overemphasize how complex this is.
It's a really tough issue, and I was not an electrician by trade. I knew nothing. All I knew when I came up here originally in 2002 is if I stuck my finger in that socket over there, I was going to get shocked. That's what I knew about energy. Now I know a little bit more, but it's still taking, I'm still learning today. But the process is so important. So we started, and I knew it was going to take a time because, again, I wanted to involve, there's so many groups out there, whether it be environmentalists, whether it be utilities, whether it be manufacturers, whether it be automakers, whether it be small businesses, mom and pop shops, and you have legislators, and you have people that want to take care of the earth, so the environmentalists. Everybody has an opinion, so I brought them all together, and I couldn't bring all of them together, but what I did do is I chose one individual that represented that expertise from that arena of that perspective on the issue. So I had an environmentalist or two on this committee I put together. I had utilities, I had manufacturers, I had small businesses, I had legislators, I had and the public, and had a lot of other people that all had an idea. Businesses that do energy efficient things for your home, a lot of those groups. So we ended up with 65 people on this committee, and we met for 6 months before we even got started. And the reason was to allow everybody, number one, process to me is so important, and we have to respect everybody in that room. And so everybody, when they were speaking on the floor, they had the floor, and they were able to say their point and make their argument what they thought the new energy bill should contain. And from that group, we came up with a goal, because in the end, everybody's not going to agree. And so when you have two competing ideas that are two pretty good perspectives on how to handle a situation, you got to choose one or the other. You can't do both. And so what I do, and what helps me as a chairman, and what has worked well for me, is I then go back to the goal and say, which of these two great perspectives gets me to that goal? And then because of that is what I base it on. It's not about personality, who's representing who's donated most of your campaign. None of that means anything. It's about the goal that the group established, and then everybody respects that because they got an opportunity then to shape public policy, which is so important.
So let's talk about the goal. What is the goal going back 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago? So now you know that energy policy is going to have to be changed because the way energy is going to be produced is going to change, and the federal government, particularly if you go back 3 years ago,
Right.
had some new ideas about the way energy was going to be produced.
Right.
So with that overlay, and even the uncertainty of knowing what the energy policy at the federal level would
Which
be
was huge.
today,
Yeah, that's true.
and
Very
we
true.
still don't know necessarily,
Right.
the state had to have something in place to protect their interest and protect the level of production that we needed. So what was the goal that you set up?
Well, what we did, exactly what you said, is we knew the federal government really had their hands in it at the time, right? And they were going to try to influence it. And so we had to then decide, we can't worry about what they're going to do. It'll take them a while. Washington's usually Washington. They don't do things quick. So we knew that was in our favor. So we said, whatever they do, we'll be able to adapt to that. But what we want to do is we want to shape Michigan's future. And we as a group are going to do that. And so we came up with the major goal was basically affordable, clean, reliable energy for Michigan users, which meant everybody. And at a price that really had competition in the mix on how we got to that goal and establishing that. And so we didn't pick, like in 2008, we picked what types of energy we were going to do. We're going to do more wind, we're going to do more solar, and because of that we have the wind turbines up in the state of Michigan, up in the Huron area, up in northern lower Michigan. We have that because of the 2008 law. This time we said, no, we're not going to pick and choose as legislators. What we should do is let the economy of scale and what is best, what is affordable, clean, reliable, and good for Michigan, let's have that to be our energy. And that's the type of system. So we as a group basically came up from that goal originally established was this IRP process. That came from that work group, that integrated resource plan, which means that the utility for the next 5, 10, and 15 years has to go in front of the commission, and they have to come up with a plan that they say where they're going to get their energy up from for the next 5 years. And before they get approval from that, they have to have certain things in it. And what we want to do is to say that we want you to look at renewables, which was a big part of our energy production today. We want you to look at energy efficiency, which was the governor's number one priority, if you remember, and he's important in this process. That's what he wanted, energy waste reduction is what he called it. That was important because you do get a good bang for your buck, at least in my opinion and others, that was a good thing to do. And then the other part was, okay, when we actually have to build some things because we have old plants, 50, 60-year-old coal plants. The federal government was trying to get us to shut them down anyway. They were getting ready to retire anyway, so we knew we were on the cusp of we're going to have to come up with new base load energy that is always there 24/7 that we'll have to pay for and build, take on new mortgages, so our rates are going to go up. How do we define, how do we go about establishing when a utility wants to do that? What are the checks and balances on that utility? And so we said they can come up with their plan for the next 5, 10, and 15 years. And so the first 5 years is the major one because when they go in front of the commission, if they get approval there, they then get to put in our rates and start building whatever was approved in that 5-year plan. But before they do that, they have to go out on competitive bid for everything they want before they come to the commission, tell us what it's going to cost and what the makeup is going to be. And then when they come, if you put in a bid for that utility because you want to be the provider of wind, solar, energy, whatever, biomass, whatever it is, if you didn't get the contract for it in the initial, what they chose, you could go in front of the commission after the utility got done and say, hey, I got a better idea. Mine was cheaper. They didn't pick mine, and you got a second chance as a provider or some developer, whatever. So the utility just didn't have all to say. And so you could come in and make that argument to the Public Service Commission. We're cheaper than what the utility picked, and here's why. And so you get a second chance. And so when that is done, once that comes together. The commission then decides, after everybody's had an opportunity to go in front of them, make their choice and make their issues known, the commission can say, we approve the utility plan or we don't, and here's why, and here's what you need to change to get approval. And then they'd have to go back, maybe because some contractor came up and said, I could do it better, and they saw the price difference. Because the numbers are all out in the open, it's all open, has to be reported to the Public Service Commission. Go ahead and pick that. Send them back, redo the work. If they send them back, redo the work, they come back and they get approval because they've changed it, and they'll say what the changes are. They get the approval, but then everybody had a fair shot. But before they even do that, after the plan gets approved from the commission, they have to go out and set it out for competitive bidding again. So we know exactly the final agreement is going to be what are we going to pay, because it might take a year to get that plan reapproved and go back and change it and come back. We want to know exactly what the number is. Now, whatever the commission held, if you go over that number that's approved, utility, you're paying for it. You can't charge your customers. And that's one of the things we did. And what you end up competing is, everybody competes. So you have wind now is going to compete with solar, where generally they were always in the same group. We want green energy. Well, now you're going to have to compete with each other, which benefits all of us, whether you be natural gas, whether you be biomass, whether you be wind, solar, and whatever new technology comes in the future. You don't have to come back to the legislature because we didn't put any definitions or any parameters around it. Let's say batteries all of a sudden are viable. You produce energy today, you don't use it all, you can store it in batteries. That'll be a game changer for this policy, but you don't have to come back to us and change the law. You can do that and be a battery provider and make that argument in front of the commission or to the utilities in the first phase and make your argument and see if they'll go that way. And so it really is a living, breathing document that will be able to grow whichever direction we go in. You don't have to rely on the legislature to go back and change everything. We lose a little power, we give up power doing that, but it's good for the citizens of Michigan.
The policy that you set 8 years ago had a profound effect on energy production in this state. What the federal government has done has had a profound effect. Coal plants are closing all over the state. One of the things that I knew, but I hadn't observed firsthand, was that in that bill 8 years ago, it was mandated that there was going to be renewable energy. There was a portfolio that had to be met. So that created a demand. Well, the demand has been met largely, it would appear, with wind energy, particularly up in the thumb and the central part of the state. And because the demand was mandated, it meant that the scale could be such that it starts to become more affordable. So it's a chicken and the egg situation that some may argue was too much government, but it has changed greatly the way we produce energy. And it's created a viable wind industry, hasn't it?
It really did, and that was the intent. I mean, that was Governor Granholm's intent at the time, was she thought there was value in cheap, what she would call cheap energy, because the fuel is free, right? The sun is free and the wind is free. But yet it still costs money to get that industry going. And when we put that 10% renewable portfolio standard on there by 2015, 10% of all of our energy had to come from renewables. That's what that 2008 law did. It mandated that. We met that goal, but what it did do is it told the utilities, you've got to go out and start investing. And you couldn't own all of it. In the 2008 law, you could only own half of it, and the private industry had to own the other half. So it was a 50-50 split. So they didn't have a monopoly on even that 10%. They had to go out and compete, and they could only own maximum of 5 of the 10% that they were mandated to have. And so what it did do is, when we did that, obviously a lot of companies came in, a lot of people bid on those jobs, a lot of companies came in and put up those turbines, whether it be for the utilities or for themselves, and got approval and got the price down, because the more you produce things, the cheaper it does become, right? And it wasn't just Michigan doing it, it was a mandate that a lot of states were doing around the United States. Most states were. And so the price started coming down, down, down. You competed even more there, so that drove the price down even quicker. So the price of renewable energy from 2008 to 2016 or 17 today, it really has come down quite a bit. They still have a subsidy going on with the federal government, but that was supposed to expire, but they extended that, I think, for another 5 or 10 years. But now, in this new plan that we have, that doesn't matter, because now you had the mandate's still there till 2021, because we went from 10% to 15%, but after 2021, all the mandates are gone, all the charges on your bill are gone, all the charges on your bill for energy efficiency are gone, so all those little line items on your bill will be gone. Now those have to compete on their own. My whole idea back in 2008, and what we were pushing back then, working with the Democrats and the Republicans, was we can jumpstart it, but sooner or later, after it gets going, you got to swim on your own. Well, that's when that day's coming in this bill that we just passed in 2022 the IRP process, everybody's on their own. There's no mandates, there's no subsidies, there's no nothing. And we will get, because of our goal, the most affordable, reliable, clean, efficient energy available to be able to use for our portfolio going forward. And we don't choose as legislators. That's why I can't wait till 2022 and see what happens.
We're back with more To the Point. The budget in Lansing, the budget in Washington. That's what we'll be following this week, and we'll keep you updated on 24 Hour News 8 and next Sunday right here on To the Point.